Humiliation smells like cheap hand sanitizer, and the particular sweat of a man performing power in front of an audience. I know this the way I know the smell of a sucking chest wound, not because I read about it somewhere, but because I have been close enough to both that the memory lives in my nose before it lives in my brain. My name is Dana Reyes. I am 44 years old. I have a lanyard that says contractor, temp staff in laminated plastic, a left wrist that predicts rain more accurately than any weather service, and a cup of coffee I have been nursing since 5:50 a.m. in the corridor outside the Cascade Valley Hospital trauma wing, because the break room was occupied by a conversation I did not want to be part of. I am a float nurse. I have been a float nurse at Cascade Valley for 7 months. I have, by careful, sustained effort, made myself into the person this building treats like furniture. They thought I was the contractor they escorted out of the building. Then, 9 Special Forces operators walked through the ambulance bay at 1:14 p.m. And the man at the front, the one whose voice carried the specific weight of a person who has never needed to raise it, looked at the security guard still holding my arm and said, without inflection, "That's our commander. Stand down. I'm going to take you back to the start." Cascade Valley smelled the way all Level 2 trauma centers smell at 6 a.m., the astringent cold of overnight bleach, underneath it the faint sweetness of something metabolic from Bay 2, and everywhere the scorched rubber note of coffee that the night shift brewed at 2 a.m., and that no day shift nurse had ever thrown away out of a respect bordering on superstition. The fluorescent overhead panels didn't buzz. They hummed, a low-grade abrasive frequency that settled in the back of your teeth around hour 3 of a 12-hour shift and had an opinion about whether you were going to enjoy the rest of your day. Somewhere down the east corridor, a cart rolled in the rhythmic stop-and-go pattern of a tech, making morning rounds. Monitors chimed from 4 bays at once, a disjointed, erratic rhythm that to the civilian staff meant start moving. To me, it meant Monday. I had been a nurse for 16 years. The first 10 of those years I had spent in environments that would have considered Cascade Valley's particular variety of controlled chaos to be something between a simulation and a gentle suggestion. I know what real looks like. I know what real smells like. I know the specific quality of silence that falls over a space where something has gone very wrong, the way the air changes temperature and density before the monitors catch up, and I know it because I have been in enough of those silences that my body has developed a theory of them independent of my brain. I move through the trauma wing the way I always move through it. Low, efficient, invisible, float nurses are infrastructure. Nobody thinks twice about infrastructure. I had worked very hard to be that and only that for 7 months, and I had mostly succeeded. I restocked the East medication cart. I counted units without looking at them, the count arriving clean and exact in my head before my hands finished moving, the way it always did. The way it had in places with much worse lighting and much higher stakes than this. 44. Correct, I moved on. The wrist predicted rain, which meant Oregon in October, which meant it was always predicting rain. I had learned to work around it. In Kunar Province in 2015, I had worked around worse with less complaint, which was a comparison I kept to myself because it wasn't useful to anyone, and was the kind of thing that, if you said it out loud, sounded like the opposite of what you meant. There was a patient in Bay 3 that the overnight notes described as stable. The overnight notes were wrong, not egregiously wrong, not the kind of wrong that makes you put down your clipboard and page someone immediately, but wrong in the way that a compass 2 degrees off becomes a serious problem after 30 miles. And I had been watching Bay 3 since 6:10, and the drift was there if you knew how to read it. I had flagged it in the handoff log. I had noted it specifically. I had done the thing that a float nurse is permitted to do, which is note the observation and trust the clinical staff to act on it. The clinical staff had not acted on it yet. I was on my third pass of the East cart when the trauma wing doors opened and the morning arrived with him. Dr. Richard Cho was Chief of Emergency Medicine at Cascade Valley, and he moved through the trauma wing the way certain men move through the spaces they have decided belong to them, as if the furniture has been arranged for their benefit, and the people are part of the furniture. He was 48, precise in his presentation, the specific kind of competent that becomes dangerous when it hardens into certainty. He had been chief for 6 years. He had, in those 6 years, developed the clinical equivalent of a blind spot, the conviction that his read of a situation was the situation, and that alternative reads were administrative noise. He was not a cruel man, which made him harder to argue with. He was simply a man who had been right enough times that he had stopped leaving room for the times he might not be. He came through the doors at 7:02, and he covered the distance to my supply cart in 12 steps, and he looked at me with the expression he used for float staff, not hostile, simply blank. The expression of a person doing their own inventory and deciding what category something fits. "Reyes," he said. This was progress. He had learned my last name sometime in the past month, which was more than most department chiefs managed with float staff. "Dr. Cho, Bay 3 is stable. Stop flagging it in the handoff log. It creates unnecessary documentation, and it makes the overnight team look like they missed something." "The overnight team did miss something," I said. I kept my voice level. I kept my hands on the cart. "The patient in Bay 3 has a BP trend that I reviewed Bay 3 at 6:40. His voice was not loud. He had the kind of authority that does not require volume because it has never been seriously challenged. The patient is within normal parameters. Your job is supply management and transport support, not clinical assessment." I looked at Bay 3, the patient, 49 years old, presenting initially with what had been logged as a gastrointestinal complaint, was lying with his right arm extended in a posture that was slightly but specifically wrong. Not the posture of someone uncomfortable. The posture of someone whose body was quietly rerouting resources. "I understand," I said. "Good." He moved on toward Bay 1. I made a note in my personal log. The small one I kept in the left cargo pocket of my scrubs, the one no one at Cascade Valley had ever asked about. I noted the time, the patient's posture, the BP trend. I noted that I had raised it and been told to stop. I dated the entry. Old habit. In places where accountability mattered, you wrote things down. 3 minutes later, nurse practitioner Kim Sato, the good one, the one who moved through the wing with the specific economy of motion that told you she had been doing this for real for a long time, came past my cart on her way to Bay 5. I turned so only she could see the page I had open in my log. I held it up for 2 seconds. She read it. She looked at Bay 3. She continued to Bay 5 without changing her expression. 12 minutes later, Bay 3 was getting the workup it should have had 2 hours ago. I went back to the medication cart. The second time, Dr. Cho addressed me publicly. It was in front of the entire charge desk, during the 10:50 briefing that he ran every Monday morning for the clinical team. A briefing that float staff were technically not included in, but that I attended anyway, because the charge desk was also where I picked up the morning transport schedule, and there was no efficient way to be in the vicinity without being in the vicinity. He had found the note I'd slipped to Kim Sato. Not the note itself. I had not written it down. It had been a held page, shown and withdrawn. But Kim had quietly ordered the workup. and the workup had found something, and now there was a patient in Bay 3 who was being upgraded and transferred, and Dr. Cho had worked backward from the workup order to Kim, and from Kim to the conversation she hadn't quite had with the float nurse by the East medication cart. "I want to be very clear," he said, addressing the room at the level that meant it was specifically for one person in it. "Clinical decisions at Cascade Valley are made by credentialed clinical staff, not by contracted labor, not by float nurses who have appointed themselves unofficial diagnostic consultants." He did not look at me. He did not need to. The room understood the geometry. When contracted staff exceed the scope of their assignment, it creates liability for this department, and it creates confusion in the clinical chain. I don't want confusion in my clinical chain. The room was very quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet when they are waiting for someone to respond and are not sure what the response will cost. I looked at the transport schedule in my hands. I had worked very hard for 7 months to be the person who did not respond to things like this. To be infrastructure, which does not respond, which simply receives and routes and continues. I thought about Kunar Province. I thought about a forward operating base in the spring of 2015, where the clinical chain had consisted of me and a Special Forces medic named Garrett, and a radio that worked approximately 60% of the time, and the decisions we had made in the 40% without the radio were the decisions that had determined whether 8 people in that room were still alive the following morning. There was no one above us to exceed the scope of. There was the patient and the problem, and what you knew how to do about it, and that was the entire chain. I thought about the patient in Bay 3, who had been upgraded because someone had looked at the thing I had seen. "Understood," I said. I looked at the transport schedule. I looked at Bay 3. I looked at my hands. I swallowed. It tasted like something I had been swallowing for 7 months. Gordon, one of the security team, had been standing near the charge desk during the briefing. He was a large man with a placid temperament and the specific quality of stillness that comes from a job that is mostly waiting. He looked at me with something that was not quite pity and not quite solidarity, the look of a witness who has no standing to intervene and knows it. Outside, somewhere in the parking structure, I heard something I had not heard in 3 years. It didn't start in the air. It started in my back fillings. A low-frequency pressure that arrived before any audible sound. The specific resonance of heavy rotorcraft in tight formation that you learn to identify not with your ears, but with your skeleton. I stopped looking at the transport schedule. I have heard civilian helicopters. I have ridden in civilian helicopters. They make a specific kind of noise, high, urgent, optimized for speed, that is entirely different from what my back teeth were telling me right now. What my back teeth were telling me was weight. Mass, the sustained rhythmic displacement of a significant amount of air by a significant amount of machinery moving in the specific formation of military aircraft on an operational approach. Not medevac, not police. Military, and not the kind that files flight plans with civilian air traffic control. I put the transport schedule down on the counter, very carefully. "No, not here. You are Dana Reyes. You have a temp lanyard and a wrist that predicts rain, and you have been Dana Reyes, float nurse for 7 months, and that is what you are, and it is what you will continue to be." From the ambulance bay, the sound of the approach deepened. Not one aircraft. I counted rotor signatures the way I had been taught to count them in a place where knowing the difference between 1 and 4 had operational consequences. 3, 4, more beyond the parking structure, holding wider orbit. Through the glass of the trauma wing's exterior wall, I saw the first one come in over the tree line, an MH-6M Little Bird, which is not a hospital aircraft, which is the aircraft you send when you want to be fast and precise and not visible to everyone in a 10-mile radius. Behind it, the unmistakable silhouette of two AH-60G Pave Hawks, and behind those, the automatic doors to the ambulance bay opened. Dr. Cho stepped out onto the receiving apron with his arms crossed. I heard him begin to speak to someone I couldn't see yet. And then I heard something else. 2 words, in a voice I hadn't heard in 3 years, carrying the specific quality of a person accustomed to having 2 words be sufficient. Find Reyes. My hands pressed flat on the counter. Dr. Cho's voice carried back to me through the glass. This is a medical facility. Whatever operation you think you're, Gordon, the security guard with the placid temperament, chose this specific moment to appear at my left shoulder. Reyes. He had the expression of a man following an instruction he had not generated and was not comfortable with. Dr. Cho asked me to escort you out of the clinical area until further notice. He said, given the briefing this morning, I looked at him. He was a good man, Gordon. He had the globe and anchor tattoo on the back of his right hand, dark blue and slightly blurred with age, and he did not enjoy being the instrument of other people's decisions. Gordon, I said quietly. I know, he said, just as quietly. I'm sorry. He put his hand on my arm, gently, with a minimum of force that the instruction required, and he began walking me toward the ambulance bay doors, which were the closest exterior exit, and which happened to be the exact doors through which, at that precise moment, 9 men in full kit were coming. They stopped moving the instant we came through the doors. 9 of them, in 2 columns, the specific stillness of trained men who have shifted from movement to assessment in a single step with no intermediate stage. Full kit. Real kit. The kind that has been somewhere recently and shows it. They were not here for a medevac. They were not here for a scheduled transport. They were here for a reason that had a name, and I was starting to understand that the name was mine. The man at the front of the left column was Chief Warrant Officer Thomas Breck. I knew this not because I could read his name tape at this distance, but because I had known Thomas Breck for 11 years, and Thomas Breck had a way of standing in a room, or in an ambulance bay, or in a doorway in Kunar Province at 3 a.m. That was entirely his own. Compact, unspent, the specific quality of stillness that belongs to people who are always ready and have never needed to prove it. He looked at me. He looked at Gordon's hand on my arm. He looked at Gordon. He did not raise his voice. That's our commander, he said. Stand down. Not loud, not accompanied by any movement toward Gordon, any shift in weight, any change in the hands that were loose at his sides. Just the sentence, delivered with the flat factual certainty of a man identifying something and correcting a misunderstanding, and expecting the misunderstanding to resolve itself. Gordon's hand released my arm. I'm not sure he decided to release it. I think his hand simply received the information in the sentence and responded accordingly. Dr. Cho had come back through the ambulance bay doors behind us. He had the expression of a man who had been interrupted mid-sentence and was re-summoning the authority for the rest of it. I don't know who you people are, he said. But I am the chief of emergency medicine at this facility, and I have the authority. Breck looked at him. The look lasted 1 second. In that second, every calculation Breck needed to make about Dr. Richard Cho was completed. No, Breck said. You don't. He looked back at me. Commander, he said, we have a critical on the 2nd aircraft. Blast plus orthopedic, complicated presentation. Doc Garraway did what he could in the field, but he's asking for you. Doc Garraway. Specialist First Class Aaron Garraway, the medic from the Kunar deployment, the one who had graduated from Special Forces medic training and gone back for more and ended up in the unit that Breck ran, the one who knew. because he had watched me work in conditions that stripped everything down to what you actually knew and what you were actually willing to do. That when a presentation got complicated, you asked for the person who had seen complicated before. I looked at Gordon. His hand was at his side, and he was looking at Breck with the expression of a man reassessing several things at once. I looked at Dr. Cho, who had the expression of a man whose authority had just had a very clear conversation with a different kind of authority and was processing the outcome. I looked at the H-860G holding landing position in the north corner of the parking lot. Not the helipad. Too heavy for the helipad. Its rotors still turning at low idle. Waiting. "I'm not your commander anymore," I said to Breck. It was true. I had been out of service for 3 years. Whatever I was to the unit, whatever I had been in Kunar and in the 18 months of continuous deployment before Kunar, it was past tense now. I haven't been for 3 years. "Yes, ma'am," said Breck, in the tone of a man acknowledging a statement while not altering his assessment. "Do you know how to do this or not?" I looked at my hands. Still. Completely still, in the cold October air of an Oregon ambulance bay, with the downdraft from the Pave Hawk pressing against the side of my face, and the smell of aviation fuel, and something else. The unmistakable compound scent of a trauma in progress, drifting from the aircraft's open bay. "Get me a kit," I said. His name was Staff Sergeant Dominic Fierro. He was 26 years old, and he had taken the blast on his left side. Primary blast wave, secondary fragmentation, and then tertiary impact when the concussive force had put him into a wall he hadn't chosen to be near. The orthopedic component was the femur, midshaft, comminuted fracture from the impact, and Doc Garraway had splinted it clean in the field. But the blast component had done something to Fierro's chest wall that the splint and the field dressing could not address. And what it had done was create a bilateral presentation that was tricky in a way that required someone to have seen a bilateral presentation under field conditions to recognize it for what it was. Garraway was kneeling beside the litter when I climbed into the aircraft bay. He looked up. 3 years had added some gray to his temples, and none to his expression, which had always had the quality of a man who was already 3 steps into the solution before the problem finished introducing itself. "Left side's the primary," he said, "but the right's compensating in a way I don't like." I knelt. I put my hands on Fierro's chest wall, feeling the rhythm, or rather, the counter-rhythm, the specific paradox of bilateral compromise where one side's failure creates a secondary failure in the other through the mechanical coupling of the mediastinum. I had seen this twice. Once in a forward surgical team textbook that I had read in 2009 at the School of Advanced Military Studies, and once on a table in Kunar Province in 2015 on a man whose name I remembered and whose face I saw sometimes when the wrist predicted rain. "You're right," I said. "Sequential, left first." Garraway had the kit open before I finished the sentence. I worked. My hands moved in the sequence they had always moved in when the brain went quiet, not thinking, doing. The muscle memory of 1,000 hours of training, and the additional authority of the hours that were not training at all but the real thing. In conditions that do not repeat in simulation. In spaces where the light was wrong and the floor was wrong, and the only thing that was correct was the anatomy in front of you, which does not change for geography. Left side. 4th intercostal space, mid-axillary line. The resistance, the release, the immediate shift in Fierro's breathing. His sat began climbing. I moved to the right side, upper border of the 5th rib, careful at the neurovascular bundle. Garraway's hands anticipated mine, not interfering, complementing the specific choreography of 2 people who have worked together in tight spaces and have learned each other's grammar. 2nd release. Fierro's chest began moving correctly for the first time in however long it had been moving incorrectly. 64. 70. 77. Tube him, I said. Already prepped, Garroway said. We worked. Outside the aircraft bay, the rotors idled, and the October air pressed in, and somewhere below us I could hear the specific sound of a trauma bay mobilizing. Doors, equipment, the controlled urgency of people who have been told something is coming and are getting ready to receive it. Breck had made calls. The department was preparing. 86. 91. Fierro turned his head toward me. His eyes were open, more focused now, the oxygen doing what oxygen does when you give it a restored pathway. He had the expression common to people returning from the edge of a thing, not gratitude yet, that comes later, but the specific alert stillness of an animal that has just determined it is not, in fact, prey. You're good, I said. We've got you. He tried to speak. Doc G said, Don't talk. Breathe. He said you'd fix it, Fierro said, not obeying. 26 years old, and already had the operator's particular immunity to instructions delivered without a physical reason to comply. Doc G is usually right, I said. Rest. His SAT read 93. We brought him down through the ambulance bay on a Stokes litter, Breck at the head, Garroway and I on either side, 2 operators at the foot. Dr. Cho was standing on the receiving apron. He had the expression of a man who had been reorganizing his understanding of several things simultaneously. He looked at Fierro. He looked at the chest tubes. He looked at my hands. He stepped aside. Or 2 is ready, he said. To me. Directly to me. In the tone of a physician speaking to another clinician. Thank you, I said. Inside, the trauma wing had mobilized cleanly. Kim Soto at the trauma bay threshold with the surgical team behind her, the attending surgeon already gowned, the scrub tech ready. Cascade Valley at its actual best, which was considerable when someone told it what was coming and let it prepare. We handed Fierro off. I stood in the corridor while the doors closed, and I put my back to the wall, and I breathed. Breck came to stand beside me. He was quiet for a long moment in the way of men who have had a lot of practice not filling silences. Fierro's going to be fine, he said. I know. Garroway told me you'd retired. He looked at the ceiling. He didn't say where. Nobody knew where, I said. Garrison found the employment record. Float nurse at Cascade Valley. He paused. 7 months. 7 months. He was quiet for another moment. Then, the unit wants you to know. The Kunar operation. The after-action assessment credited the survival rate to your field protocols, all 7 of the category alphas. He kept his eyes on the ceiling. 6 of the 7 are still active. 1 medically separated in 22, but he's good. He coaches youth football in Georgia. I did not speak. I thought you should know that, Breck said. The corridor hummed. The fluorescent lights above us continued their low abrasive opinion. Somewhere in the building, a cart rolled in the stop-and-go rhythm of morning rounds, which it turned out was an afternoon sound as well when you were paying attention to it. All 7. I had left without knowing. You leave and you make peace with not knowing because the alternative is not leaving. And I had needed to leave, and I had made what peace I could with the incomplete arithmetic of it. 7 category alphas. 7 critical patients in a 6-hour period in a province whose name I had not said aloud in 3 years. 6 of them still active. 1 coaching youth football in Georgia, which was, in the specific calculus of outcomes for that kind of injury, in that kind of environment, as close to perfect as outcomes get. I was quiet for a long time. Tell the one in Georgia, I said, that I'm glad he found something good. HR called at 4:15. I let it go to message. They called again at 4:40, and I answered, because eventually you answer, and a woman named Carol with a careful voice offered me, with some additional careful words first, a position, lead trauma nurse. Real credentials, real scope, real badge. She used the phrase valued member of our clinical team twice, which told me the conversation had been reviewed by legal before it was made. I told her I would think about it. I was not ready to stop being infrastructure. But I was beginning to understand that infrastructure was not the same as invisible, and that the two things I had been using as synonyms for 7 months were in fact different words. I went back to the trauma wing at 5:20. Gordon was at the security desk near the ambulance bay. He saw me coming and he stood up, not much, a few inches, the instinctive courtesy of a man who had revised something. "I'm sorry about earlier," he said. "You did your job," I said. He looked at the back of his right hand. The globe and anchor dark blue and slightly blurred. "My son's in," he said. "3rd deployment." I looked at the tattoo. I looked at him. "He'll be okay," I said. It was not an empty thing to say. I had a basis for saying it. He nodded. He sat back down. I went to the East medication cart. The end-of-day restock needed doing. The perpetual, unfinished, necessary work of keeping a trauma wing supplied and counted and ready for the next thing that came through the doors. I opened the top drawer. I arranged the sterile glove packs in the specific overlapping pattern that maximizes drawer capacity, the way a logistics master sergeant at Fort Bragg had showed me in 2006, and that I had never found a reason to do differently. 44 units, correct, outside, through the trauma wing's exterior glass, the last of the AAH-60Gs lifted from the parking structure's upper deck and banked south toward whatever base it had come from. Its running lights blinking red and green in the early dark of the Oregon evening. And then, it was gone. The fluorescent lights hummed. I was still here, still whole. If this story hit you somewhere real, if you found yourself thinking about someone quiet who deserved more than they were given, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to the channel. We tell stories about people who never needed a spotlight. Just a fair chance. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see every single one.